Hello everyone and welcome back to the Cyclocross Social podcast. Today we'll be discussing the second day of the European Championships held on the Van Berg in the Netherlands, and as yesterday I am joined by Twan and Issam.
Hello.
Hey everybody.
So the second day we had again 3 races here. We had the men's elite race, women's under 23 race, and the day was started by the men's juniors. We'll start by talking about the last race of the day, which is the most important one, the men's elite race. Issam, tell us what happened.
Yeah, so with the men's race, we had an okay start, but there was a crash just in the first couple 100 meters of the race. Main riders that were hampered with that actually would play a role in the race were Louden Zweek. Toon van der Bos was there involved as well, Joris Nieuwenhuizen. But the main contenders were unfazed with this. They managed to get through with the race. There were 6 Belgians up front in the beginning, the 6 main Belgians with Van Toerenhout, with Iserbyt, with Toonaerts, with Quinten Hermans. And there was this Dutch rider that was there, breaking a little bit the show for the Belgians, and that was Lars van der Haar. We saw Dibo having a strong moment in the beginning of the race, but eventually would fade away. And then up front, Hermans, Aerts and Van Toerenhout broke away from the pack. Iserbyt had to leave a gap because of a mistake, and Van der Haar was in his wheel. Iserbyt had to chase, brought the gap very close, but was not able to join, and then his pace just completely collapsed. And that was probably the first time this season we have seen Iserbyt really that weak. Very weak moment for him. He would only finish 12th. This race. Van der Haar was able to join the likes of Quinten Hermans, Aerts and Van Toerenhout, or should I say Aerts and Van Toerenhout, because Hermans then broke away. Van der Haar sees that Aerts and Van Toerenhout are not really good and breaks them away from that duo, and then there is this chase between Hermans and Van der Haar. Who is Van der Haar able to get back to Hermans? It looked like it was not going to happen, but then you could see that Van der Haar was just a little bit stronger, just a little bit better. Hermans, that had to put a lot of effort in to break away, his pace dropped little by little, and with a couple of laps to go, Van der Haar was able to get back into the wheel of Quinten Hermans, and when he was there, it was quite clear who was going to be the winner today, and Van der Haar was just able to get away from Quinten Hermans and get his second victory in the European Championship, with second place for Quinten Hermans and third place for Michael Van Toerenhout.
Let's focus a bit on that battle between Van der Haar and Hermans. In my opinion, it was a pretty interesting chase. It was more a chase than a real battle. They were only together for a very short amount of time, but it was a very interesting chase to watch. Well, at least what I think what happened here was that Quinten Hermans knew that the parcours wasn't that difficult, and that the only way he could break away is if he basically tired the rest, and that's what he did. But in the end, he also tired himself, because in my opinion he already thought in the beginning of the race he was doing too much work. Then he broke away, and then I thought, okay, so maybe he's just really good, but eventually, like in the last 2 or 3 laps, he was really, really tired, so he probably also tired himself too much. At least that's what I think from it.
It's really 2 different pacing strategies for the top 2. Quinten Hermans probably slightly underestimating the parcours and going a bit too early, and Van der Haar just lapping very consistently throughout the whole race, and doing a great job of catching him at the end there, making for a very interesting dynamic in the race as well.
I think overall Van der Haar was definitely the strongest and the smartest today, and if that comes together, there's almost nothing you can do. And I mean, Quinten Hermans, he gave it his all. He had a good shot. I thought he would have that win in the bag, but I mean, in a way, I was always had the feeling, okay, now Van der Haar is close, okay, he's going to come back, and then the gap was like stabilized for a couple of laps, and I was like, it's going to be hard. Are we looking at the same scenarios in the under 23 women's race? And then Van der Haar puts in another solid sprint up the cobbles and takes back 5 seconds, and then the gap is only 5 seconds, and it stabilized. It was a lot of mixed feelings, very unpredictable, but like, we should wind back a bit to the beginning of the race, because I think that's where Belgium lost this race. They end on the places 2 until 6. In the beginning of the race, Van der Haar was dropped twice, or maybe even 3 times, sometimes due to a mechanical issue or a crash or another rider being in front who can't keep up with the pace anymore. But we saw Belgians actually riding back Van der Haar. So do you guys agree that Belgium really lost the race there?
No, I don't. Belgium, on paper they lost the race, but I don't think Belgium lost the race today because, Tonaerts was just not good enough. Van Toerenhout also was just not good enough. Hermans tried it, but even if he was a little bit more conservative with his energy, I think Van der Haar was just the strongest today, and it was a bit of a weird race in a way. I didn't expect Van der Haar to be this good, but definitely, I think he got his reward for being very consistent this season. He had a couple of bad races, but overall he was very consistent, and I guess the reward is the European Championship.
There were definitely some moments where maybe the Belgians could have given Van der Haar a few extra seconds of disadvantage, but he just had the measure of Quinten Hermans, and I don't think that Quinten Hermans could have accelerated much more if it was necessary in the final lap, whereas Van der Haar really paced himself well so that he had that energy at the end if required. So I think Van der Haar just riding a brilliant race today, and as Issam said, they're getting the reward for what has been a very solid season.
I do agree that Van der Haar was the strongest, but I still think that the Belgians could have been able to beat them, because at some point I think we had a leading group of 9, 7 Belgians, Van der Haar and Dibo. In that situation, you can always do something. I mean, Van der Haar wasn't even in a good position. He was 6th, but I had the feeling that Belgium already had the title secured for themselves. You saw Aerts attacking, Van Toerenhout reacting with Iserbyt on his wheel. We saw Hermans attacking, and then there was a reaction by one of the Belgians. And that is something that's not great to see. I mean, yesterday we discussed team tactics in the under-23 men's race. Now we're talking about the elite race. In the elite race, I do think that there should be more team tactics, but we already said it in our preview that it's a bit 1 hard, 2 mixed interest, and of course Belgium doesn't have the reputation in cyclocross to really pull the team tactics out. But in a situation like that, if you have the first rider, which then would be Hermans or Aerts, attack, and all the 5 others in the wheel would do nothing, I mean, Van der Haar would need to react, but from that position, I mean, it's not that easy to overtake here besides the road section. So I do think that Belgium could have at least tried more. That's more, would it have worked? Perhaps, we don't know, but would you guys then at least agree that they should have tried more?
Well, I think you go into it with 4 or 5 riders in the Belgian camp that think they can win it, and that are more busy with each other than with Van der Haar. So I think it's just a thing of they aren't that scared of him in any way. So they know he's gonna be good, but they also think he's just going to grab a medal and be playing a nice part in this race. And if we'll get there, with a bit of team tactics in the end. But we probably won't do it because we all want that jersey.
I think maybe the crucial moment in the race was probably when Iserbyt made that mistake on the hill and had to he kind of brought back Van der Haar to a reasonable gap, and then Van der Haar could make the jump. It's a bit weird for me why Iserbyt did that, because he could have easily just said, okay, I have a lot of guys in front of me, all countrymen, country feathers that are just, also Belgium. So, I'm not going to pull. Van Toerenhout is up front. Even though I am the European champion, it's not that important if I'm going to bring Van der Haar back. So I think that part of the race was definitely a bit weird. But I think other than that, the race, when Van der Haar joined the guys in front, tactics couldn't be played anymore, because Hermans, the pace he was pulling there was so high that, no one was really comfortable. So I think even if they would have dropped the pace a little bit, Van der Haar would have then accelerated, take the race in his own hands, because he took a lot of initiative when he was able to, and when, they gave him the room to do so. And whenever he felt that he can just sit in the wheels, he did that. And he just played it tactically very perfect. It was not the smoothest race, but he was just able to carry the victory home.
I do agree that once Hermans was gone, there was nothing that the Belgians could have done anymore. But about that Iserbyt move, what makes it extra weird is that was basically the last thing Iserbyt did. It was like his farewell to the race. Okay, I'm not going to win, so I'll bring Van der Haar back. That's, of course, I don't think that's his intention, but that's kind of what it came across like. He put in a massive effort to reduce a gap of 10-12 seconds to only a handful. And then we came onto the road and Van der Haar accelerated and Iserbyt was gone. We didn't see him anymore. So, how do you guys feel about that and about Iserbyt's race in general?
Like I said, I mean, this is probably the first time this season we have seen Iserbyt collapse completely like this. This is something we're not really used to him, especially in the beginning of the season. It was just a weird moment because, like you said, it felt like he just wanted to push one more time, maybe with the idea of if I come back, I can then rest a little bit and recover, because there are some sections that are a little bit easier than others. It is obviously when you're in a group, it's easier to ride than when you are, alone, because with the wind, it's very hard. But it was just a very odd race, and tactically, he could have played it way different, and that could have maybe influenced the race towards a Belgian victory.
Yeah, I think we see Iserbyt who just doesn't feel as great on the day, and maybe it's a bit weird. Maybe he just pushed himself a little bit too far, finding out that today wasn't quite the day for him, and he had to reduce the pace. It's weird to see someone be so good the whole season and then just have a complete off day.
It makes me wonder if Paul Stuyvesant perhaps mistimed the peak of their riders, because both for Betsema and Iserbyt this championship was the main goal in the early part of the season. Both riders were consistent up at the top of their game until now, and then this weekend they both disappoint. Betsema 5th, of course she had a crash, but Iserbyt didn't crash. Jens 12th, I don't think that's a true representation of the form he has, because I think at some point his motivation also just like massively dropped. So that was also a role in it. But Iserbyt, still, even if he would have ended in the back end of the top 10, it would have been very disappointing.
I don't think it's coincidence. I think that from all the champions that we have, I'm not really sure, but I have a feeling that the champions that we have this weekend, or that became a European champion, most of them were not good in both races, Overijse and Koppenberg. And I think just the combination, doing both races at a 100%, and then also try to become European champion, I think that is just, maybe there is just something that you should be a little bit more moderate with your energy. Maybe just do one race a little bit harder than the other, or just skip one race. Because I have a feeling that with Iserbyt as well, that in Overijse and in Koppenberg both winning. Overijse definitely not a race I would expect him to win, but he won. In Koppenberg he was even able to drop Aerts and come solo. So maybe it was just a little bit too much in that weekend, and then he just paid the price for it this weekend, because I don't think, if your shape drops, you're not going to be 12th.
Let's run down our entire top 10 then. We had, of course, that win of Lars van der Haar 6 years after his European title in Heiberg, also on home soil. Behind him was then Quinten Hermans in front of Michael van Toerenhout and Toon Aerts. Toon Aerts had some kind of mechanical issue and never was able to recover from that. Behind him, Zweek and Jens Adams, both anonymous races. I think especially for Adams a solid performance. Then in 7th we find Joshua Dibo ahead of Joris Nieuwenhuis, Jacob Dorigoni and Dan Soeter, rounds of the top 10. Let's talk a bit about Joshua Dibo. We already saw him at the front basically for the first time in Overijse last week. 7th place here today is a very solid result in my opinion for him.
Again, a very quick start and not quite able to hold it to the end. But I think it is a better result overall. And I think he can build on this. He knows what he needs to do. He has like the pace over like 2 laps to be able to keep up with the best. And it's something we saw Quinten Hermans do, of course, when he came back from his injury. Of course, he did have like previous results to show that he could get back to that level. But Joshua Dibo, only 25, like still some steps and maturing to do clearly, and hopefully he can kick on.
He's the same age as Joris Nieuwenhuis, the former under-23 world champion who ended 8th here. 8th is not necessarily a bad result for Nieuwenhuis. It's maybe even a bit better than what I expected, but it just leaves me to wonder. Nieuwenhuis, he had that one season when he was riding for Sunweb, which he still does by the way, but it was in that red kit under Cervelo, and he was at the front. I think he was fighting for podiums. He even got a podium, I think, in Zolder in the Elite World Cups, and now he's been fading a bit. And what do you guys think this is down to?
I think he's focusing more and more on the road and his role there at DSM. and it's costing him some cyclocross performances. Like in the 18-19 season, as you said, he was flying, and he was actually relevant in all these races, and we could have talked about him for a while. But these days, when you see him in the top 10, you're like, oh, that's quite a nice performance. It's a step in the right direction again, and hopefully he can do, like, he finds the joy in cyclocross and he can focus on it a little bit more, because he was very talented. He still is, probably.
Yeah, it's weird, or at least his decision to focus on the road, because I can get some riders, ever since Bohm and Stibar did it, there's been plenty of riders focusing on the road, and it's only becoming more with Van der Poel and Van Aert proving that it's possible to be good in both, but it's just not for everyone. And for Nieuwenhuis, okay, on the road he got some good results last year in Paris Tours, for example, but I still think he's wasting a much better cyclocross career for a pretty anonymous career on the road, because he's mainly a domestique there. Whilst if he focused fully on cyclocross, he could, especially in the early phase of the season, be one of the leading guys.
Yeah, there is no doubt in my mind that if he would focus more back on cyclocross, and he would have done that for the past 2 years, he would have been like up there with the top 5 guys at the moment. And yeah, on the road, as you said, he is just part of the lead out train for Kees Bol, which, like, it's not that interesting. Like, Johnny Vermeers is, like, also, of course, focusing much more on the road these days, for example, but even he is much more prominent in the classics than Nieuwenhuis has been.
I guess we'll just have to wait and see about what the rest of the season brings for him. Of course, he was still 10th at the World Championships last year, but we'll see. Issam, what did you think about the guy who ended behind Nieuwenhuis, Jacob Dorigoni?
I definitely think that is a good performance for him. Getting a top 10 in a championship is always good, and I think especially for Dorigoni, it's a good performance. But I think there's just a little bit more in him. I have a feeling that if he's able to really get the complete, potential out of himself, there's a little bit more in him, and I hope he can get that. And definitely a top 10 gives you a lot of motivation to work on in this season.
Don't forget, it's only his second weekend of racing, and third race of the weekend. Only started his season last week, so 29th here makes it even more impressive considering the amount of races he did.
Yeah, for sure.
The women's under 23 race, then we had a big favorite, and that was Puk Pieterse. She had one of the faster starts, but it was Foucounet who went away as a rocket, but Pieterse quickly closed the gap. But then on the muddy section next to the pits in the first lap, she took a tumble. Her bike was broken. She needed to turn around. As she was still within the flags of the pit, she could go in the reverse direction, change her bike and get the going again. But by then it was already Van Anrooy who had caught up to Foucounet, and Van Anrooy left Foucounet behind. And ever since then, Puk Pieterse was on a charge. She gained 15 seconds on her first lap, then 13 seconds on the lap after, and then the gap settled at around 7 seconds. Shirin van Anrooy managed to match the pace of Puk Pieterse until the end. Pieterse gave it one final shot in the last lap, but Shirin van Anrooy managed to actually secure the win here, which is kind of a surprise because her season hasn't been that great. But of course, we know the talent is in there. It was Shirin van Anrooy who took the win ahead of Puk Pieterse, and Fem van Empel claimed the last spot on the podium, making it the all-Dutch podium once again. Well, guys, I think you guys also didn't expect that Puk Pieterse would have any troubles here. I think she was the strongest today, but that crash really cost her the win. What do you think, Issam?
I think after when I watched the men's under 23 race, I was like, well, tactically she can still kind of lose it if tactics are going to be played. But I didn't expect it to go this way, and obviously Van Anrooy did just a great job in managing the gap and making sure that she gained from the advantage and got the win in the back. But yeah, it was a bit of a pity for Pieterse, because I think she was the strongest. She definitely showed it, and great fighting spirit. But in the end, you cannot buy anything with that, because she only managed second, and it's a bit of a shame, because I think she, without the mistake, the race could have gone a whole lot different.
Before the race, I think Pieterse, of course, is very much the favorite, but it is always harder to race head-to-head, and still everything needed to go pretty much right for her to comfortably win it. And with that mistake, it brings Van Anrooy into the race, and Van Anrooy just riding a very strong race as well, and doing all that she could to make it as tough as possible for Pieterse, and getting that jersey as a result.
Van Anrooy deserved it, I think. She and probably the entire Baloise Trek Lions team peaked perfectly at this championship. There's a reason they leave here with 3 gold medals. So, in a way, I think that is the opposite of what happened at Paul Sauze. So, yeah, she can be happy, and I think she really deserved this title, especially being ahead of Pieterse. It will be a mental boost for her. Next week, we're going back to the place where she crashed last year, is what I meant to say, Tabor. So, she said that she's, in a way, kind of scared about it, but is also looking forward to end the tragedy that happened there. She got one of these disc breaks in her arm and was out for the rest of the season. Took her a lot of time to recover. Now she looks to be back finally. Still think Pieterse is slightly better this year, but these two are closely matched, and it's just a matter of time before we see these with Casablanca Vache, who rode in the elite race, fight it out. Of course, Sven van Empel ended third, also very talented, but I think this year she isn't matching the level that she had last year, because in a normal situation this should have been a parcours for her, and then to end third is, I don't think necessarily disappointment based on this season, but based on last season you would have expected more.
I thought you told me about a crash she had in training before she went to the US, which wouldn't have helped her as well.
That is true. Before we went to the United States, she was actually hit by a car on training, and certainly that doesn't help. But she said that was solved, but of course it can influence her training. I already kind of forgot about that because it was only one sentence in an interview with a local newspaper. So that's, I mean, it's a very valid reason. We saw it last year with Toon Aerts, that he was hit by a van before Namur and then suffered for the rest of the season. Van Empel probably is kind of experiencing the same. She said that the left side of her body was blocked. So, yeah, that's a fair point that we should raise. But I think overall, a decent performance by her. Kind of where I expected her, although I did maybe expect a bit more from Lien Burquier. But by the looks on her face after the race, she also did that from herself.
Yeah, it's unfortunate for Berger having 2 very good races last week, and then a 4th place. Not what she was hoping for. Probably was hoping for, like in this scenario, to be able to challenge with Van Anrooy for the title, or at least a medal. And it didn't quite happen for her.
Of course, she's only a first year, but I think Van Anrooy, Pieterse and Van Empel will be encouraged by the Dutch national coach to stay in the under-23 category for as long as possible, considering the strength of the squad of the women's elite category. So I think the Bonds coach or the national coach will be encouraging them to stay in that category. What do you think, Issam?
Well, I think he's just trying to make his job a little bit easier, because if he's not gonna do that, then he has to make decisions which I think some will not be happy with. So I think for his sake, it's gonna be just very smart to do that, but also for the development of the women, it's definitely a good idea to just stay now in the under 23, do 1 or 2 more years, and then go with the elites. I think when you are around 21, 20, and you see that you are getting a little bit more top 5s in the elite, you can then think about going and move up towards the elite category. But especially if you still feel that there is a lot of irregularities in your results by the elite, you definitely have to consider the under 23 as a platform to perform for victory.
Let's run down our entire top 10 then. We had the win of Sherin van Anrooy ahead of Puk Pieterse, Sven van Empel, Lien Burquier and Foucounet, who exploded after the start. 6th place was for Realini, who struggled a bit on the running sections, ahead of a bunch of first year Schreiber, Zemanova and Cousins. 10th place also goes to a Brit, Josie Nelson. Something that's definitely interesting and worth discussing here for a while is the amount of young riders we see here. The top 3, both second year under 23. Then we have 4 first years under 23 in the top 10. And there were actually no 4th year under 23s at the start here. It definitely shows to me that there's this young generation once again storming up the ranks, because I mean, we already know the likes of Van Androoy, Pieterse and Van Empel, but now Berger, also at this championship Schreiber, Zemanova, Cousins, Nelson, proving themselves, putting their name up outside of the top 10. We also have Nonden and Honesty. Definitely another young generation that is pushing through. So, what do you see as future for cyclocross? Will these is the level of women's cyclocross increasing so rapidly that just 2 years ago in Dubendorf we were saying, okay, Alvarado is gone, she's going to win the title for the next 5 years? Is the women's cyclocross developing so quickly that this young generation will already be better than the past young generation in a very short amount of time?
I do think there's like a bit of a generation missing in between, which helps a bit with making this one look good. But they certainly benefit from having had women's junior championships in Dubendorf as well. It's like more something to work toward and a more clear goal which you like have maybe, and it makes for plenty of talents to make for a more exciting racing, and more talents means everyone is pushing themselves more to the limits, so it can only be good for the women's side of the sport.
Yeah, I think what you said makes sense. I mean, of course, some of these riders didn't have the opportunity to race a women's championship, but ever since the women's sport got taken more serious and it developed, we came up with more development programs in the national federations that help develop talent in the women's side of the sport, and we can see the results of that now. And it's not, of course, we have a very talented Dutch generation, but it's not only Dutch riders we see come through. Berger, Foucounet, Realini, Cousins, Nelson, Schreiber. We just mentioned the names in the top 10 and outside of the top 10 as well. And it's definitely interesting. And I think what helps here is that there's not one country that has a significant advantage, like we can see in, for instance, the men's category, where Belgium has the existing advantage and it's harder to catch up, especially considering the nature of the sport in terms of starting fees and stuff. But yeah, I'm definitely looking forward to see this generation make steps, because we already see Pieterse fighting for the win, Berger also very solid in Overijs and Zonhoven, and I'm also very excited to see what Zemanova can do, because her technique looked absolutely fine today. The first race of the day and the final one we will be discussing is the men's junior race. We had a win by Dockx, the only Belgian title of the weekend, and he put on a fabulous show. Where we first expected a battle with Haverdings. Haverdings never really was on top of his game. Dockx attacked in the first lap, opened a 10-second gap, and never was seen again, winning by a small 50 seconds in the end ahead of David Haverdings and the Italian Luca Paletti.
Dockx is looking very much in control of the race, and just a very comfortable performance, and it's good to get this kind of experience at championships level.
Definitely agree on that one. Also thought it was nice to see the mix of flags once again here in the juniors category. Of course, there's 3 Belgian and 2 Dutch riders in the top 10, but we see an Italian standing on the podium, Paletti. I didn't really write him down as one of the favorites, and that's because he didn't race a lot. Of course, he raced the Radcross Ilna where he was second. I saw his name, but I didn't really. He was behind Jan Christensen there, and he ended 10th. Of course, he won 2 races in Italy, but no real international comparison for us to look at. So, very good to see him be up there. Also, if we look in terms of first years, we can see Victor van den Berger being the first year at Belgium, ahead of our very own Oliver Akers, who was actually fighting for the podium until he crashed, put in one effort to come back and then ultimately blew up a bit. But hey, that's the juniors category. These riders need to learn, and it was definitely good to see him being up there and fighting for the podium for, I think, at least 2/3 of the race. And if we look, lots of British talent coming through. He's a first year. We saw just outside of the top 10, Max Greensill, also first year. Nathan Smith from our team, also a Brit. So definitely good to see Issam. If like this British generation is like, it just keeps on coming. It started in Zolder when we saw Richards and Pitcock as first year, then the full podium lookout in the men's junior category in BLS, of course. And man, there's just British talent that just keeps coming through, and here we see it again today.
It seems like they're doing a good job. The generation is just coming and flowing, and I hope that this will give an impulse for for races to come to Great Britain, and that we have World Cups and maybe Super Prestige or something getting organized there, because I think there is a base for it. There are a lot of riders that are coming up, young talent, and there is also the likes of the Pidcock that is a big name in the elites, and I think those kind of things you can use that very well, and it looks very good for Great Britain. I think if they stay in cyclocross, there are a lot of riders that are coming up for sure.
This is definitely some talent we will be keeping an eye on throughout the rest of the season, starting in Tabor next week. But we have covered it all, I think, here for the European Championships. Issam and Twan, thank you for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for hosting.
I will give you quickly the results of a Cyclocross C2 race in Spain. Men's race was won by David van der Poel ahead of Lander Looks and Kevin Suarez Fernandez. Women's race was won by González Blanco in front of Nuno Palacio and Morisson. And with that said, I am wrapping off this episode. We will be back with a preview podcast for Tabor World Cup together with former Czech rider Petr Dlask, and that will be coming up on Thursday. On Thursday, there's also a very old cyclocross race, the Jaarmarkt Cross in Niel, as it's a national day off, and there will be coming a podcast of that on Friday. Thanks everyone for listening to the podcast. We will be back later this week. Goodbye.